compassion is really sort of a hinge for me. And I think to give you some perspective as to why compassion has sort of been this thing that I've sort of started to make my life revolve around, I feel like giving you a bit of my backstory will be helpful. But first, so something that was really cool was a few weeks ago, the word compassion kept coming up, and it was with Israel and then Richard. If you came to the pub theologies, they both broke the word compassion down to its root, which is co, meaning together, and passion meaning to suffer together. And I don't think it random that Catherine talks about suffering for her story. I'm glad that she likes to talk a lot, because otherwise I would have gone up right after and my story would have been probably a little bit different. I hadn't really crafted it well enough. But my circumstances really created a life in which I had almost a complete lack of suffering. Really, for the first quarter of my life, I didn't know what suffering was. Or at least, I didn't know what real suffering was. So, let me paint you a bit of a picture. I was born a white male in upper class America. So those four things right there, like, if you are a white male in today's America, in the upper middle class, there's very little real suffering. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Alright. And I get the idea of your pain is your pain, for sure. And that's a part of my story. But as far as like real suffering goes, the things that people just end up ending their lives over at times, that was foreign to me. I went to private school. I was given every opportunity. I got private lessons, all the care and attention in the world. I didn't grow up in divorce, right? I had a family that was intact. My parents, not only did they love my sister and me with every fiber of their beings, but they loved each other. They set the kind of example that a child can only hope for from parents. Did they have their issues? Sure. Do they still? Yes. But that's okay. Right? Don't we all? I didn't know death. I was fortunate enough. I had not 4 but 5 grandparents. I had a great aunt who I saw as no different from any of my grandparents. And the first one didn't pass away until I was almost 25 years old. And by the way, none of them were divorced either. Right? Is it coming into focus? I didn't know illness. I didn't know disease. We live in a world where cancer, you are more likely than not, by a widening margin, to get cancer. And knock on wood, I have not had a single close family member get cancer. Addiction, I have had family members and friends suffer addiction, but not one of them has been taken out by it. I didn't know suffering, right? Those circumstances are unique, if not extraordinary. I doubt there's a single person in this room who can check off every box that I just listed. But here's the thing, and this is the your pain is your pain moment. It didn't matter that I had nothing happen to me to suffer over. By the time I was 16, I was going through depression and suffering from eating disorders. Never diagnosed, but when you can't bring yourself to get out of bed, when you can't sleep, when you can't eat because you're just so disappointed in who you are and what you're becoming, right? That's the double-edged sword to having all of that privilege, is that, what am I doing with it? and I felt like nothing. I couldn't stand the sight of myself. That was the one real issue of suffering that I had growing up, was that I grew up the heavy kid. And when you grow up a heavy kid and you're a boy, you get all sorts of jabs and purple nurples and all sorts of good stuff. There was one time where I came home, a friend of mine, I was sitting in a baseball game with him, and this was a friend of mine. Like, he and their brothers, they were all really tan, and I was this little white chubby pasty kid. So they called me like the white brother. And so this was my friend, and he did what he was calling bunches of punches. And literally for a 3-hour baseball game, he just wailed on my arm. You should have seen my arm. It was to the point where for about 4 or 5 days, I was able to hide it. But then my other mother, and that's something I forgot to bring up, is that not only did I have wonderful parents, but I had sort of like surrogate parents that loved me no differently than my own. But my other mother, she saw this bruise, and she told my mom, and you should have seen my mom. Man, you want to talk about mother bears, and like, because she loved this kid, but she was like, if you ever, I don't need to go into any more detail on that. But I did. Because of that one thing, that one small thing, I grew up a heavy kid, and nothing else mattered. Like, I just hated who I was. And when you can't do anything but simply exist, that's called depression. I don't need to be diagnosed to look back on that and think, wow, I was depressed. And I suffered from eating disorders. I was never diagnosed with that, but when, as a result of that depression, you find yourself eating fewer calories within 3 to 4 days than most people eat before noon, that's called anorexia. And when you do eat, but you're so afraid of what the food will do to your body, that you find yourself trying to work off every single calorie that you eat, that's a form of bulimia. When you find yourself sticking your fingers down your throat because you're afraid of what the food will do to you, that's a form of bulimia. When you find yourself chewing the food, but you're afraid to swallow it, but you just want the taste, so you end up spitting it into bottles, that's a form of bulimia. And I've never told anybody that. I did give Catherine a heads up, mom and dad, I'm sorry. But I tell you that, not for shock value, but I tell you that because, frankly, somebody in this room has probably been through that. And if not, I know that people you know have been through that or are going through that. And that's where compassion comes into play. Right? If we can't be vulnerable, then we can't live. That's the thing, the difference. There's a difference between existing and living. And the difference is vulnerability. If we can't be vulnerable, if we can't open ourselves up to pain, right? We can't truly live life. I ended up doing what it was that I called just breathing. I lived about 6 years between high school all the way through college, where it was my just breathe period. I kept relationships at bay. I transferred from college to college to college. And I ended up using music as an escape. I loved music, don't get me wrong. And I loved to write, and I was building my catalog, I was building my experience. But if I'm being honest, and behind that was the fact that if I'm writing music and I'm giving everything that I have to that, then I don't have to put myself out there. I don't have to be vulnerable if I'm locked in a room creating. And that's not to say that there wasn't good in those years and that I didn't have relationships, but I wasn't really living. I was just kind of right here. And in order to live, you gotta open yourself up to the vulnerability of pain. You give your heart away, you give yourself away, knowing that somebody can do whatever they want. As Catherine said, sometimes people choose to leave, sometimes people have to leave, or sometimes people just need to leave. But the point is that there's suffering in that. But if you're not prepared to expose yourself to suffering, then you don't get the good stuff either. You don't get the peaks if you're not willing to endure the valleys. So I spent 6 years just sort of breathing, just living and existing. And then I graduated college and I started my first job. And there was this moment. I was a couple of months into it, and I sat down on a weekend to write, do some music. I'd already written the music. I'd already recorded it all. I even had the melody in my head, but I just sat and stared at the screen, at the cursor blinking at me. It was taunting me. I had nothing to say. I had nothing to write about. For years prior, I had been watching movies or reading literature and using their stories to craft lyrics. But I had exhausted that. It was the same recycled, repetitive stuff that I'd been saying for years, and none of it mattered because it wasn't my story and I had nothing to say. I realized that at that moment that I need to start living. Breathing, existing is not enough. I need to do something with this. I've been given all of these gifts. I've been given these incredible circumstances, this lack of suffering. Why am I in this? Why am I just existing? So I did, and within a few weeks of making that conscious decision to do more, I decided, I was like, I'm going to start dating. I'm going to start dating. So I did, and I went on a date with a woman who, ironically, was an identical twin. And then, funnily enough, I went on another date who, ironically, was an identical twin. Right? So I had these two women who I was sort of, and I'm like, that's not me. Right? Like, when you look at me, that's not what... So anyway, one of them was obviously my wife, Catherine, and, you know, there was about every reason that we shouldn't have gotten together, right? So the fact that, hey, I was 24 years old with zero life experience, and when I say zero, like, I just explained to you, I spent my entire adult life just breathing, existing, locked in a room, writing music. Yet she was 8 years older than me. She had a 7-year-old, she had a 2-year-old, and she wasn't, like, her divorce wasn't even, like, completely signed. Like, they were still in the process of. So, like, equally for her, it's like, people looked at us, they're like, what are you doing? Like, especially our family members, because I forgot to mention the fact that, like, she had 2 other family members who worked at the same school. We both worked at the same school, by the way, which my dad is the headmaster at. So her family members, they're like, I swear, if we lose our jobs over this... So anyway, it was really quickly in that relationship, because as I said, there was real suffering there. There was real suffering there. There was someone choosing to leave in that. And there was all sorts of other things going on. And if you're intimately close with Catherine and me, you know that there's been some really heavy stuff that's gone on, and it's messy, but it was in that moment where I made the decision knowing that Catherine, being with Catherine was going to change my life, and it was going to change her life, and that there was going to be a lot of compassion there. There was going to be a lot of co-suffering there. It was very clear that there were going to be some valleys in that. And man, we hit some valleys. But it doesn't seem so bad when you're on the peaks. And there have been way more peaks than valleys. And that's the point. That's the point, is that life, if we can open ourselves up to it, if we can stomach the vulnerability that it takes and the pain that sometimes accrues, there's more peaks than the valleys. And that's why it's so hard when you hear about, these kids that are in high school taking themselves out. It's like, man, it gets better. It gets better. And sometimes maybe it doesn't get better. Right? Because that's a reality. Sometimes it doesn't get better. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle with church. Because it's like, if I do all the right things and I say all the right things, why does life suck?
Right.
Sorry, can I say suck?
Yes.
So that's where we shift gears a little bit to the church and what I'm doing now with my life. And I've had so many people ask me, they're like, so what do you do? And my answer is, I don't know. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I was just supposed to be the guy that is playing the songs. It was literally all I was supposed to be doing. And it just one thing after another, and it turned into this thing that I don't know how to do, or I can't explain it, yet people keep showing up. And it doesn't have to do with me. That's what I'm realizing. It has to do with you. It has to do with us, because my circumstances are unique, but my story is not. My story is your story. We have all been there, right? We have all been in that sort of the suck of life. And church, I think at its best, is when it is a mechanism of compassion. I realized that I'm only one human being. I'm one person. And I've got empathy. That is a beautiful thing that my parents passed on to me, is that I have empathy. And I am able to sympathize with people very well. But there's only so much that I can do. There's only so far my reach goes. And I realized subconsciously, I think, on most levels, that this can be a mechanism of compassion. It can be something that has a far greater reach than just me as a human being. So I had no idea where I am on time, and I didn't really know how to end this. And then it occurred to me, it's because it's not done. It's not done. Because my story is not my story anymore. It's our story. Because it's not just me exercising compassion and co-suffering. It is this community that is going to exercise compassion and co-suffering. It's funny. I mean, it's not funny. It's horrible. And I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. But Dalton slept in, and we're so worried about it today because Jimmy texted him last night at 10 and he didn't answer. So I called him and I texted him this morning around the time we were supposed to be started just to make sure he's doing okay and that he hadn't slept in. Because he's this crazy guy that doesn't believe in alarm clocks. So I called him and he didn't answer. And then Jimmy calls him and he didn't answer. So we keep trying to reach him, and it's like, this isn't like Dalton. Like, something is up. So Jimmy finally gets him, and so he shows up about 30 minutes later, and he's clearly off. He's clearly not himself, and it's not just he slept in, he's kind of, there's something going on there. And man, it's funny how I'm talking about compassion today, and Dalton, shows up and he's talking about how his father's best friend from forever was just diagnosed with cancer. And then Carlita comes up here to give her prayer saying that she's lost, and John have lost 3 of their friends. It's okay to be who you are. So, again, like I said, I didn't know how to end this, so I think it's beautiful that the way we're just going to end it is Israel's going to help us pass the peace, and then we're all going to share communion together.